and I'm about to bring you some good news on the Voice referendum. But first, at a time when politicians, including the New Zealand Prime Minister, medical professionals, including Health Chief Dr Brendan Murphy, and most of the media seem confused about what is a woman and the biological reality of sex differences, it's good to get some perspective from a young little girl who has not yet been poisoned by radical gender theory.
What is this right here?
The pelvis. It's the only bone in the body that's gender specific, which means it's different in boys and girls.
Is it?
Yes. The pelvis's job to protect the organs used for digesting and reproduction, which means throwing babies.
Yes, it's probably why when they can dig up old bones hundreds of years later, know whether the skeletal remains are male or female. But that sort of anatomical fact is offensive and indeed bizarre to much of the media nowadays. Take news.com.au, which is being mocked all over the world, it seems, from the UK to the US this weekend, for this tweet and article, where they reported UK Prime Minister Rishi Sunak has made a bold claim about penises amid an ongoing debate over transgender issues. Bold claims about penises? Really? You know what the bold claim was? That women don't have them. That was the bold claim. That is the bold claim, according to a news item on a news site. Perhaps the activist journalists need to watch Kindergarten Cop.
Boys have a penis, girls have a vagina.
Thanks for the tip.
Now to the race-based referendum, aka The Voice, and I'm pleased to say this time I bring good news. As of this week, you need no longer ask annoying, inconvenient questions about the model, how it will operate, or whether it will fly in the face of, I don't know, equality, unity and democracy. No, because the ABC has just released this video, Indigenous Voice to Parliament. Everything you need to know. That's right, absolutely everything. Not bad for a video on a complex constitutional amendment that goes for a whole of 8 minutes and 47 seconds. The narrator is ABC federal political reporter Dana Morse. Let's go through just some of her claims.
That's where The Voice comes in getting Indigenous people to have a say over what happens to them, sometimes called self-determination, is seen as one of the best ways to close the gap.
Getting Indigenous people to have a say over what happens to them, that doesn't sound right, because it implies that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders don't have a vote like the rest of us. And it denies the reality that we already have a multitude of Indigenous advisory bodies. No, that sounds like a glib phrase taken straight out of the government's marketing campaign, just like this next one.
The thing is, with the detail on The Voice, even if the referendum succeeds, the Parliament will still write the laws on it.
That sounds like a misleading statement, and very similar to the one Prime Minister Anthony Albanese made when he said last month that the referendum wording provided primacy of the Parliament for what The Voice will consider. But as constitutional law professor and pro-voice advocate George Williams said in response, that's the point of putting things in the Constitution. It puts them beyond the Parliament. And lastly, how about this, Doozy?
The Voice wouldn't have the power to stop policies and laws from going ahead, and any advice it gave could theoretically be ignored.
Really? Really?
Even she doesn't sound sure.
Oh, yes, this activist masquerading as a journalist seems to think she knows more than former High Court Judge Ian Callanan, who wrote in December, The Voice, or a member of it, is almost certain to argue in the courts that a member of the executive government, in executing a parliamentary enactment of a representation of The Voice, took into account an irrelevant consideration or failed to take into account a relevant one, or made a decision that no reasonable person could make. A voice in any form, in my view, will give rise to many arguments and division, legal and otherwise. He goes on to warn about the Voice being powerful, costly and ultimately unaccountable to its financiers, that would be the Australian taxpayers. And even Voice supporter and constitutional law expert Greg Craven concedes that important point about the inclusion of executive government in the Voice's purview. He said this is not simply about preventing litigation, it's about inviting litigation. It's about trailing your coat with imprecision. That's a big word. Knowing you will get litigation. And that's what's proposed here. Yes, of course it can be litigated, but you don't need to make it so unclear that it will be litigated to death. That's from a pro-voice advocate,
Yep.
my goodness. Once again, the ABC's so-called information campaign is a thin veneer for activism. They don't want you to ask questions about the referendum, they just want you to shut up and blindly vote yes. That's practically what Morse was saying as recently as January.
And it's totally fine that we don't know exactly what it will do because the legislation has to go before the parliament. That is the parliamentary process. There's no point putting all the detail to the public because they're not going to vote on it.
Totally fine. We don't know exactly what the Voice will do. Just vote yes, yes. I don't think so. What about a constitutional convention? What about a government-funded yes and no campaign? What about our Prime Minister and Indigenous Australians Minister giving a straight answer to questions about the Voice? Just for once. That's what I'd like to see ABC push, I don't know. Instead, we get this partisan drivel.
So that's just about everything you need to know before you decide whether you vote yes or no to change the Constitution.
The same journalists behind the ABC's Everything You Need to Know explainer published this piece yesterday. Peter Dutton's comments in Alice Springs show why so many Indigenous communities don't trust politicians. Yep, that's the ABC for you. Never forget that you pay more than $1 billion a year for that divisive activism masquerading as impartial journalism.